Welcome to Lecture 1 on memory. Memory is the process that allows us to record, store, and later retrieve information. It allows us to learn from our environment and from our experiences. Without memory, learning is nearly impossible. We would be able to remember quite a few classically conditioned things, but beyond that, really wouldn't be able to encode it or store anything. And it allows us to adapt to our world. So I want you to go watch what happens when you remove the hippocampus in the folder Chapter 7, Memory Lecture Videos. Welcome back. HM is amazing. We have learned so much from him. I'm so impressed that he maintained such a good nature. Usually when people have a profound cognitive deficit, they tend to get angry a lot or very jaded. HM was not that way. He maintained such a good positive attitude about everything. So we're going to look at different stages of memory processing. So according to the information processing theory, memory works like a computer. We encode information into neural codes, so we create neural pathways basically for memories. And we create what are called retrieval queues. So memories work as a lock and key system. The memory is the lock. A retrieval queue is the key that opens that memory. Ideally, you want multiple keys for that memory, so you can lose one or two if you need to, or if you just happen to. And then we retrieve information. We store the encoded information and then retrieve the information when we need it. So with the information processing model, we have encoding, storage, and retrieval. With the modal memory model, we've got 3 stages: sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. Sensory memory is very brief. Working memory is very active. It's still short in time, but it's extremely active. And long-term memory, which is relatively permanent. So with the modal memory model, we've got sensory memory. If we don't attend to sensory information, we lose it. If we attend to that information, it gets into working memory. So short-term memory is now working memory. If you rehearse this information, if you play with this information, you can encode it for long-term memory. But if you don't work to get that information to long-term memory, it won't get to long-term memory. So sensory memory is a very brief storage of sensory information that fades unless attended to immediately. It usually lasts anywhere from less than a second to several seconds. It's incredibly brief. If you attend to this sensory information, you can begin to encode it for working memory. Very short. You have less than a couple seconds to attend to sensory information and take it to working memory, or to just let it float away. Visual and auditory memories are maintained at the sensory memory stage long enough to ensure a continuous sensory experience, but not any longer. So if you're watching a movie, your sensory memory helps you follow the sentences. Now you need working memory for that too, but in order to actually make sense of the first 5 frames of the film, you need sensory memory. Then we get to working memory, and this is a memory store that temporarily holds a limited amount of information. Now this is a brief storage period, and it allows us to work with the information we are intending to so that we can later recall that information if we encode it. I think of working memory like clay. So when I I just imagine having a ball of clay in my hands. And with working memory, I manipulate it. I play with it in the ways that I want because I'm trying to get a long-term memory. The long-term memory would be the final product that I make, the actual bowl, let's say a bowl, that I make. Working memory is when I have to work with that material. So please go watch How Your Working Memory Makes Sense of the World. You'll find that in Chapter 7, Memory Lecture Videos on Moodle. Welcome back. So, the components of working memory. You've got the central executive, which is the boss. It controls this whole process. It filters information to long-term memory if you choose to do so. Working memory has to use long-term memories to further encode for new long-term memories. So, you get your sensory memory information gets to working memory. Working memory will reach into long-term memory stores, pull that information into working memory, and then works with both of those sources to create a new long-term memory. There's the phonological loop, which encodes auditory information. So here we have sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. The phonological loop, it's auditory information. Right here is central executive, coordinates all of it. Back. We have the visuospatial sketchpad, which encodes visual information, and the episodic buffer, which holds temporary information about one's self. Sorry, got it. Okay, so here you've got the visuospatial sketchpad and the episodic buffer. When you can tie information to yourself in working memory, that information becomes a retrieval cue. It helps you retrieve that memory so you tie information about yourself to the new information you're trying to encode. Then you can send that off to long-term memory. When you join information with things that are personal or about you, it does become a very effective retrieval cue. I hope that made sense. Now, working memory holds information for about 20 to 30 seconds unless you make an effort to maintain that information. So this is your basic memory span. If you don't attend to the information in working memory, it will not become a long-term memory. You have to work to create long-term memories. So long-term memory is the potentially infinite storage of all memories. Long-term memory is distinct from working memory in its duration and its capacity. There really isn't any limit to the capacity of long-term memories. How long a long-term memory is depends on how well you've worked at it. Meaningful memories are stored in long-term memory in network-like structures. Our memory system requires a whole healthy brain. It's a whole brain activity. Now, when we look at the brain and how memory works, we'll look at individual structures, and those are simply the most active when it comes to forming memories. But the brain scatters information throughout itself. So information flows from sensory memory to long-term memory, and from long-term memory to sensory memory. So there's this ebb and flow. Now, working memory has to work with both sensory memory and long-term memory. So we have to make a decision to make long-term memories. So we're playing with information in our working memory, and we have to decide, okay, I want to keep playing with this information. I'm going to keep playing with this piece of clay. And then make sure that I keep that, the bowl that I make, the end product. One of the ways we can get information to long-term memory is just simple rote repetition, very shallow processing. Maintenance rehearsal is shallow processing. And that allows us to keep that information, to keep playing with it for beyond that 20 to 30 seconds. Then we have elaborate rehearsal. And this involves focusing on the meaning of information or expanding, elaborating on it in some way. This is deep processing. And this is where self-reference can become incredibly powerful if you can tie that information to something about you, something personal. That is a form of deep processing, and those memories are going to be longer lasting in long-term memory. So when you're encoding information, you want to do deep processing. Shallow processing does just the basics. It's deep processing. It's elaborate rehearsal that gets information into long-term memory and stays in long-term memory. And visual imagery is really effective too. If you create pictures to go with the information that you're trying to encode, that can be very effective. Okay, so that's the end of lecture 1. Thank you.